I'm Hayley Thompson, 28, a graphic designer in Portland, Oregon. And that Friday afternoon in October, I thought I was ready to share my biggest career victory with my family. I was wrong. After landing the promotion to senior creative director at my firm, something I'd worked toward for 3 years, I drove the 4 hours from Portland to my hometown of Millbrook, carrying a bottle of champagne and my heart full of hope. The promotion meant a 40% salary increase, my own team, and finally the recognition I'd fought for. I figured this time, this achievement, my parents would have to acknowledge me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But when I walked through the front door of the house I grew up in, calling out, "Mom, Dad, I have amazing news!" the silence that greeted me felt heavier than usual. My mom, Linda, appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her smile thin and distracted. "Oh, Hayley, you didn't call," she said, glancing past me toward the stairs. "Your father's napping. We weren't expecting you." I held up the champagne, my excitement deflating slightly. "I got the promotion, Mom! Senior creative director! I wanted to celebrate with you guys." Linda's eyes flickered with what might have been interest, but it passed quickly. "That's nice, dear. Your sister would have been so proud. She always brought Emma into everything, even my victories. Why don't you put your things in your old room? I'll make some coffee." I climbed the stairs, muscle memory guiding me to the second door on the right, my childhood bedroom, where I'd spent countless hours drawing and dreaming of becoming an artist. I turned the handle and stepped inside, and my world tilted sideways. The room was a shrine. Emma's shrine. Candles flickered on every surface, casting dancing shadows on walls covered with blown-up photos of my sister. Emma at prom in her silver dress, Emma accepting her homecoming queen crown, Emma in her pre-med college acceptance photo, beaming with that radiant smile that had captivated everyone. Her belongings were displayed like museum pieces. Her jewelry box, her favorite books, her dried homecoming corsage under glass. Where my old desk used to sit, there was now an altar-like arrangement with Emma's high school diploma, her acceptance letter to Oregon State, and a guest book for visitors to sign. A donation box labeled the Emma Foundation, keeping her memory alive, sat prominently on my former dresser. My legs went weak. This wasn't just redecorating. This was erasure. "Mom," I called out, my voice cracking. Linda appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting to something I couldn't read. "Beautiful, isn't it? Father Miguel helped me arrange everything just right. Emma is watching over us now." I stared at her, searching for any recognition of what this meant. "Where are my things?" Linda waved dismissively. "Oh, I moved all that old stuff to the basement. You haven't lived here in 5 years, Hayley. Emma needs this space more than your childhood clutter." Emma needs this space. My dead sister needed my bedroom more than I, the living daughter, needed any acknowledgement that I ever existed in this house. I walked to what used to be my corner, where I'd set up my first art station at age 12. Now it held Emma's cheerleading trophies. My high school art awards, my graduation photo, my acceptance letter to Oregon State, none of it remained. It was as if Hayley Thompson had never lived in this house. "The whole town contributes to the foundation," Linda continued, oblivious to my shock. "Mrs. Kim brings donations every week. Even Father Miguel takes up collections at church. Everyone loved Emma so much." My father, Robert, appeared in the doorway, his face flushed from his nap. He looked at me with tired eyes that used to sparkle when he would help me with my homework. Now he just seemed empty. "Hayley," he said quietly, "you're home." "Dad, did you know about this?" I gestured around the room. He glanced at Linda, then back at me. "Your mother, she needed this, after Emma." After Emma. Everything in this house was now divided into before Emma died and after Emma died. And apparently, after Emma died, I ceased to exist. I found myself backing toward the door. The champagne bottle felt ridiculous in my hands. My promotion, my team, my success, it all felt meaningless standing in this shrine to my perfect dead sister. I need some air, I managed. Outside, I sat in my car, handshaking. 5 years I'd been sending money home every month. $500 to help with medical bills and grief counseling. $500 that apparently had funded this elaborate memorial to Emma while my own existence was boxed up in the basement like unwanted junk. Mrs. Kim from next door approached my car, her weathered face creasing with concern. "Hayley, dear, how wonderful to see you. Your mother mentioned you've been having such a hard time financially these past few years. It's so good that you can still visit despite everything."
"Mrs. Kim," I said carefully, "what exactly did my mother tell you the Emma Foundation money is for?" "Well, grief counseling for your family and college scholarships for local art students like Emma would have wanted. Your mother says Emma appeared to her in a dream and asked her to help other young people achieve their dreams." Scholarships, grief counseling, none of which existed, because I'd been paying for my parents' actual bills while they collected donations from the community by claiming I was unemployed and they were running a charity in Emma's name. I sat there as Mrs. Kim walked away, staring at the house where I'd grown up, where my childhood bedroom had become a tourist attraction for my dead sister's memory, while my living achievements were literally buried in the basement. For the first time in 5 years, I felt something other than sadness about Emma's death. I felt rage. Sitting in that car outside my childhood home, staring at the shrine that used to be my bedroom, the memories hit me like a tidal wave. I'd spent 5 years trying not to think about how things were before Emma died. Now I couldn't stop. Emma was 19 when the accident happened, just 2 months into her sophomore year at Oregon State. Pre-med, 3.9 GPA, sorority vice president. She'd called me that Thursday night, gushing about some guy named Brad she'd met at a fraternity party. "Hayley, you should transfer here. We could be college sisters." She'd laughed into the phone. I was 23 then, already graduated, and struggling to find my first real design job. Emma never seemed to notice that her effortless perfection made everything harder for the rest of us. The accident happened Friday night. Emma was driving back from another party when she hit black ice on Highway 26. The paramedics said she died instantly. I remember thinking, even through my grief, that somehow this was typical Emma. Always leaving when she was still perfect, still beautiful, still everyone's favorite. But it was what happened at her funeral that really showed me where I stood in my family's hierarchy. The church was packed. Half the town came to mourn Emma Thompson, the girl who'd lit up every room she entered. During the service, person after person stood up to share memories. Her high school teachers, her sorority sisters, her boyfriend, classmates from elementary school. Emma the star athlete, Emma the honor roll student, Emma the homecoming queen who stopped to help freshmen find their classes. I sat there in the front pew between my parents, waiting for someone, anyone, to mention that Emma had a sister who loved her too, that maybe I had memories worth sharing. No one did. When the pastor asked if family members wanted to speak, my mother stood up. Through theatrical tears, she painted Emma as an angel taken too soon, destined for greatness, loved by everyone who knew her. My father nodded along, his face stone. When Linda finished, she sat down and grabbed my hand, squeezing it like she was seeking comfort. But she never asked if I wanted to speak, never thought that maybe the other daughter might have something to say about losing her sister. I'd prepared something, actually. I'd written about how Emma always encouraged my art, how she'd convinced me to submit my portfolio to Portland State when I was too scared to try, how she'd call me after bad dates to complain about boys who just didn't get her, while I listened and wished anyone would call to complain about me. I sat there holding my unspoken eulogy, while stranger after stranger got up to praise my perfect sister, And I realized that even at Emma's funeral, I was invisible. The reception was worse. People approached my parents with condolences, sharing stories about Emma's impact on their lives. A few people acknowledged me with awkward pats on the shoulder, saying things like, "At least your parents still have you," or "You must be so proud of your sister." Not "sorry for your loss," not "tell us about Emma from your perspective." Just the assumption that I existed, primarily as Emma's sister. And now that she was gone, my main function was to console our parents. That's when the financial request started. 3 months after the funeral, my mother called. I'd just landed my first real job at a small design firm in Portland, finally earning enough to move out of my cramped studio apartment. "Hayley, honey, we're struggling with the grief counseling bills. Emma's death has been so hard on us financially. The therapist we're seeing costs $300 a week, and your father hasn't been able to work much. Could you help us out? Just until we get back on our feet?" I sent $500 that month, and the next month, and every month for the next 5 years. The calls became routine. "Hayley, the house payment is short. Hayley, the car needs repairs and we can't afford it. Hayley, we need help with groceries." Always accompanied by reminders of how Emma would want me to take care of them, how Emma would be so proud of my success, how this is what family does for each other. I never questioned it. After all, I was the surviving daughter. I had the good job, the stable income. If I couldn't save Emma, at least I could save my parents from financial ruin in their grief. But now, sitting in my car, staring at that shrine, I saw it differently. Emma's death hadn't just taken my sister. It had given my parents the perfect excuse to treat me like an ATM while simultaneously erasing my existence. They'd turned Emma into a saint and me into a ghost who sent money from Portland to keep the saint's memory burning bright. I thought about all the times I'd called home, excited about a work promotion, a project I was proud of, a guy I was dating, only to have the conversation somehow shift back to Emma. "Emma would have been so proud of you. Emma always said you were talented. Remember how Emma used to..." Even my successes belonged to Emma somehow. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my mom's Facebook page. Post after post about missing Emma, about the charitable work they were doing in her memory, about what a blessing it was to have such a generous community during their difficult financial times. But in 5 years of posts, I could find exactly 3 mentions of me. 3! And each one identified me as Emma's sister Hayley. Not just Hayley, never just me. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the photos from various Emma memorial events. There was my mother, center stage at church fundraisers. There was my father, accepting donations at community dinners. There were neighbors, teachers, friends, all gathered to celebrate Emma's memory and support my family through their ongoing grief. And there, in the corner of exactly one photo from last year's memorial service, was me. I'd driven down for the anniversary, hoping to properly grieve my sister for once. But I was barely visible in the shot, blocked by Mrs. Peterson from the grocery store, my face partially cut off by the camera's frame. Even in group photos, I was invisible. I realized I was crying, sitting in my car outside my childhood home, crying for my dead sister and my own erased existence. Emma hadn't meant for this to happen. She'd loved me in her careless, assumption-filled way. But her death had become the tool my parents used to manipulate me and the community while simultaneously making me disappear. My phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "Hayley, are you okay out there? Dinner's ready. I made Emma's favorite meatloaf." Emma's favorite. Of course. I wiped my eyes and made a decision. I needed perspective. I needed someone who'd known me before Emma died, who might remember that Hayley Thompson had her own identity once upon a time. I scrolled through my contacts and found the name I was looking for, Jasmine Park, my college roommate, now a licensed therapist in Portland. If anyone could help me understand what the hell was happening to my family, it would be her. Jasmine, I said when she picked up, I need you to drive to Oregon. Something's very wrong here, and I don't think I can handle it alone. Jasmine arrived at 7 a.m. the next morning, carrying 2 large coffees and the no-nonsense expression she wore when she was in full therapist mode. I'd spent the night in a motel rather than sleeping in my parents' house, and I was grateful to see my friend's familiar face. Okay, she said, handing me a coffee and settling into the passenger seat of my car. I thought you sounded completely shaken on the phone last night. Talk to me. I told her everything. The shrine, the donation box, Mrs. Kim's revelation about my supposed unemployment, and the 5 years of monthly payments I'd been sending home. Jasmine listened without interrupting, but I could see her professional mind working, cataloging details. When she finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Hayley, she said finally, her voice gentle but firm, what you're describing isn't normal grief. This is pathological. What do you mean? Your sister died 5 years ago. 5 years. Healthy grieving involves gradually integrating the loss and moving forward while maintaining loving memories. What your parents have done is frozen Emma in time and turned her death into their primary identity. She paused, studying my face. And they've made you complicit in funding it. We drove to Murphy's Diner, the same place where Emma and I used to split pancakes after church on Sundays. Over breakfast, Jasmine walked me through what she was seeing with trained eyes. Let's do some math, she said, pulling out her phone's calculator. You've been sending $500 a month for 5 years. That's $30,000, Hayley. $30,000 that you believed was going toward grief counseling and medical bills. The number hit me like a punch to the stomach. $30,000 that could have been my down payment on a house, my emergency fund, my future security. And based on what Mrs. Kim told you yesterday, your parents have been telling the community that you lost your job and they're struggling financially, so they're collecting donations from neighbors while simultaneously receiving hundreds of dollars a month from you. But maybe they really are struggling. Maybe they need... Hayley, Jasmine's voice cut through my rationalization. Stop. Just stop for a minute and listen to yourself. She leaned forward, her dark eyes intense with the focus she'd used to help her therapy clients break through years of conditioning. You just told me you got promoted to senior creative director. You're making good money, you're successful, you're living your own life in Portland. But when I ask you about your achievements, you sound almost apologetic. And when you talk about sending money to your parents, you sound guilty that it's not more. I started to protest, but she held up her hand.
When was the last time your parents asked you about your life? Not your sister's memory, not your financial contribution to their Emma project. You, Hayley, your dreams, your relationships, your goals. I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. I genuinely couldn't remember. And this shrine, Jasmine continued, turning your childhood bedroom into a memorial while putting your belongings in the basement, that's not preserving Emma's memory. That's erasing yours. The words hung in the air between us. Erasing mine. My parents lost their daughter, I said quietly. She was special. Everyone loved her. I'm sure she was wonderful. But you lost your sister, Hayley. You lost Emma, too. Where was your grief counseling? Where was the community support for your loss? I stared at my untouched eggs, feeling something shift inside me, a crack in the wall I'd built around my own feelings for 5 years. I went to 2 sessions with a therapist right after Emma died, I admitted. But my mom kept calling during the appointments, crying about how hard it was for her, so I stopped going. I figured I should be strong for them.
You were 23 years old, grieving your sister, and instead of getting support, you became the emotional and financial caretaker for your parents' grief performance. Grief performance. The phrase stung because it was accurate. Linda's dramatic displays of mourning, the social media posts, the constant references to being chosen to carry on Emma's memory, it was all performance. "What do I do?" I asked. Jasmine pulled out a small notebook, her planning mode kicking in. "First, we're going to document everything. I want you to gather bank records showing the money you've sent. We're going to find out what this Emma Foundation actually does with donations. And we're going to talk to people in town who might have a clearer picture of what's really going on." "You think they're lying about everything?" "I think your parents have created a very comfortable lifestyle funded by your guilt and the community's sympathy. Whether they started out lying or just adapted to the benefits, I don't know, but we're going to find out." That afternoon, we started with Mrs. Kim. Jasmine's professional training made her an expert interviewer, and within 20 minutes, we had a clearer picture of Linda's narrative around town. According to Mrs. Kim, I'd been unemployed for 2 years, struggling with depression and unable to cope with Emma's death. My parents were supporting me financially while also trying to keep Emma's charitable foundation running. The community had been contributing to help with my family's medical bills, grief counseling, and the scholarship fund Emma had supposedly dreamed about. None of it was true. "Mrs. Kim," I said carefully, "I've never been unemployed. I live in Portland and work as a graphic designer. I've been sending my parents money every month, not the other way around." Mrs. Kim's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, surprise, then growing alarm. "But Linda said, she showed us pictures of you looking so thin and sad. She said you were living in a studio apartment because you couldn't afford anything bigger." I pulled out my phone and showed Mrs. Kim pictures of my actual life: my downtown Portland apartment, my office, my team at work, pictures from recent client presentations. Mrs. Kim stared at the photos, then at me. "Honey, I think you need to talk to Father Miguel." As we drove towards St. Mary's Catholic Church, Jasmine was quiet, processing what we'd learned. "Your mother has been running a sophisticated con," she said finally. "She's created a fictional version of your life to justify taking money from neighbors while hiding the fact that you've been supporting them financially." "But why make me look bad? Why not just ask for money directly?" "Because martyrdom is more profitable than simple need," Jasmine replied. "A grieving mother supporting her struggling daughter while maintaining her dead child's memory? That's a compelling narrative that opens wallets and keeps them open." Father Miguel Santos was in his 50s, with kind eyes and the sort of calm presence that made people want to confess their secrets. When we explained why we were there, his expression grew troubled. "I've been concerned about your family's grieving process for some time. Your mother's intensity about Emma's memory seemed to be growing rather than healing, and there have been some irregularities with the donation collections." "What kind of irregularities?" Jasmine asked. "Well, the Emma Foundation isn't registered as a charity with the state. I've asked Linda several times about the paperwork, but she always has an excuse. And the scholarship money—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "What about the scholarship money?" I pressed. "In 5 years, no scholarships have been awarded. Linda keeps saying they're building the fund, but when I asked to see the foundation's books last month, she became very upset and accused me of not trusting her grief." My hands clenched in my lap. 5 years of donations from families who could barely afford groceries, all disappearing into my parents' personal accounts, while I sent them an additional $500 monthly. "Father Miguel," I said, "I think my parents have been stealing from your parishioners." As we drove back toward town, Jasmine and I sat in heavy silence. The scope of the deception was bigger than either of us had imagined.
"I need to call my aunt," I said finally. "My mom's sister, Sarah. She's a doctor in Seattle, and she never liked how my mom handled Emma's death. If anyone in the family will tell me the truth, it's her." Jasmine nodded. "Good. We need someone in your corner who has authority and can't be manipulated by your mother's victim routine." I dialed Sarah's number, my heart pounding. When she picked up, I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Hayley, what a wonderful surprise. How are you, honey?" "Aunt Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Have my parents been telling people I'm unemployed and struggling financially? There was a long pause. Then Sarah's voice came back, tight with anger. Hayley, where are you right now? I'm in Millbrook. I came home to share some good news about a promotion, and I found things that don't make sense. I'm driving down there tonight, Sarah said firmly. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't give your parents any more money until I get there. Your mother has been pulling this garbage for 5 years, and it's time someone called her on it. As I hung up, Jasmine reached over and squeezed my hand. You ready for this? She asked. I looked toward my parents' house, where the shrine to my perfect dead sister glowed in the evening light, funded by my money and built on lies about my life. I'm ready, I said. For the first time in 5 years, I meant it. The next morning, Jasmine and I started what she called our fact-finding mission. Armed with notebooks and a carefully planned approach, we set out to discover just how deep my parents' deception ran. Our first stop was Danny Vega, my old high school friend, who now worked for the Millbrook Gazette. Danny had always been quiet in school, the kind of guy who noticed everything but said little. I had had no idea he'd stayed in town until Jasmine found his byline on several articles about Emma memorial events over the years. We found him at Rosie's coffee shop, hunched over his laptop with the focused intensity I remembered from our AP English class. When he looked up and saw me, his face lit up with genuine surprise. Hayley Thompson! I wondered if you'd show up for the anniversary service next week. Anniversary service. I felt my stomach drop. What anniversary service? Danny's expression shifted. The 5th anniversary of Emma's death. Your mom's been planning it for months. It's going to be the biggest memorial event yet. Full community fundraiser in the high school gym. Jasmine and I exchanged glances. My mother was planning a massive public fundraising event and hadn't even told me about it. Danny, I said carefully, can you tell me what you know about the Emma Foundation? He pulled out his phone and showed me the newspaper's archived articles. 5 years of coverage about my family's ongoing grief, the scholarship fund that was supposedly growing each year, and my parents' dedication to helping other families cope with loss. But as I read through the articles, I noticed something strange. In the early pieces, right after Emma's death, I was mentioned as surviving daughter Hayley. But as the years went on, the references to me became vaguer. The family continues to struggle with their loss. Linda Thompson dedicates her life to preserving her daughter's memory. By the most recent articles, I had disappeared entirely from the narrative. Danny, Jasmine said, as a journalist, have you ever tried to verify the foundation's charitable status or see where the donated money goes? Danny's face darkened. I've tried. Every time I ask Linda for documentation about the scholarships or the grief counseling programs she claims to fund, she gets emotional and says I'm dishonoring Emma's memory by questioning her mother's dedication. But you kept writing positive articles about the fundraisers, I said. Because the whole town believes in what she's doing. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store contributes $50 every month. The Kowalski family gives $20. These are people who don't have extra money, but they give it anyway because they think they're helping a grieving family and supporting local kids' education. My chest tightened. These were our neighbors, people who'd known me since I was a child, giving their hard-earned money to what they believed was a legitimate charity. Danny, I need to show you something, I said, pulling out my bank statements on my phone. I've been sending my parents $500 every month for 5 years. I thought it was for grief counseling and medical bills. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the payment records. Hayley, your mom told everyone you've been unemployed and struggling with depression since Emma died. She says you can barely afford rent, let alone help the family financially. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too airless. My mother had been using my supposed unemployment as part of her fundraising pitch, while secretly collecting money from me every month. There's more, Danny said reluctantly. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but last month I saw your mom coming out of Patterson Jewelry with a bag. When I asked Mrs. Patterson later, she mentioned that Linda had bought an expensive necklace. Paid cash. How expensive? Jasmine asked. $2,000. I stared at him. $2,000 for a necklace while she was telling neighbors she needed help buying groceries? I have to ask, Danny said, looking uncomfortable.
Are you planning to do something about this? Jasmine leaned forward. What would you do if you discovered a local charity was committing fraud? He'd said, I'd investigate it, write an expose. It's my job.
Even if it involved the town's most beloved grieving mother? Danny was quiet for a long moment, especially then, because she's taking advantage of people's goodness. Our next stop was the bank. I'd called ahead and spoken with the manager, explaining that I needed to understand how my family's finances worked. As someone who'd been sending regular payments to my parents' account, I had some right to information, particularly if fraud was involved. What we discovered made me physically sick. Over the past 5 years, my parents' joint account had received not just my monthly payments, but deposits from dozens of community members. Small amounts mostly, $20 to $100 at a time, but they added up. The account showed regular cash deposits that lined up perfectly with church collection dates and community events. But the outgoing payments told a different story. Instead of grief counseling and scholarship funds, the money was going toward car payments, credit cards, home improvements, and luxury purchases. That $2,000 necklace was just the tip of the iceberg. There were restaurant charges, vacation rentals, expensive electronics. My parents had been living a lifestyle funded by their community's sympathy and my guilt. I need to sit down, I said, feeling dizzy. Jasmine guided me to a chair in the bank lobby. This is financial fraud, Hayley. Your parents have been collecting donations under false pretenses for years. The bank manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd known my family since I was little, looked genuinely distressed. Hayley, honey, I had no idea about any of this. Your parents have always seemed like such good people, especially after what they went through with Emma. Mrs. Rodriguez, I said, has anyone ever asked about setting up actual scholarship accounts or charitable fund management? No. All the Emma Foundation money goes into their personal checking account. I assumed they were handling the charitable distributions privately. That afternoon, we visited Father Miguel again. This time, I asked him to show me the church's donation records for Emma-related collections. In 5 years, he said, spreading the ledgers across his desk, this parish has donated over $15,000 specifically for the Emma Foundation. The money was always given to your parents directly because Linda said the foundation wasn't large enough yet to need formal banking. $15,000 from one church alone. And I knew there were collections at other churches, plus private donations, school fundraisers, and community events. Father Miguel, Jasmine said, what would typically happen when a family wants to establish a memorial scholarship? We'd help them set up a proper charitable fund, work with local schools to establish criteria, create a selection committee. There are legal requirements for handling public donations. And none of that has been done for the Emma Foundation. No, I've suggested it several times over the years, but Linda always said they were still planning, still grieving, not ready for the formalities yet. As we left the church, I felt the weight of 5 years of lies pressing down on me. My parents hadn't just been taking my money, they'd been systematically defrauding an entire community that trusted them. We need more evidence, Jasmine said as we sat in my car. Before we confront your parents, we need to have everything documented. That evening, we went to the public library and used their computers to search public records. The Emma Foundation wasn't registered anywhere as a charitable organization. No tax filings, no state registration, no federal nonprofit status. It existed only as a donation box and a story my mother told. We also found something else. Property records showing that my parents had refinanced their house twice in the past 5 years, pulling out equity each time. They'd been living well beyond their means while simultaneously collecting sympathy donations and my monthly payments. Your parents have been running a con, Jasmine said bluntly, and you've been unknowingly funding part of it. I stared at the computer screen, at the evidence of my family's systematic deception.
$30,000 from me, thousands more from the community, all based on lies about their financial need and my supposed unemployment. "What's the anniversary service Danny mentioned?" I asked. Jasmine pulled out her phone and showed me the Facebook event page she'd found. Emma Thompson 5th Anniversary Memorial Fundraiser, next Friday night at the high school. 200 people had marked themselves as attending. The event description made my blood run cold. Join us in honoring the memory of our beloved Emma Thompson and supporting their family as they continue their mission of helping others through grief. Donations will support the Emma Thompson Scholarship Fund and provide ongoing assistance to the family during these difficult times. Come celebrate Emma's life and help us reach our goal of $10,000 for this special milestone anniversary. $10,000. My parents were planning to collect $10,000 from the community at an event I wasn't even invited to. "Jasmine," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me, "I think it's time to call on Sarah." As I dialed my aunt's number, I realized this was no longer just about my erasure from my family's narrative. This was about justice for an entire community that had been exploited in Emma's name. And for the first time since I'd discovered that shrine, I felt something stronger than hurt or confusion. I felt ready to fight.
Aunt Sarah arrived Thursday evening, and the difference in my parents' behavior was immediate and telling. Linda, who had been dismissive of my concerns all week, suddenly became animated and talkative when her sister walked through the door. "Sarah, what a wonderful surprise! You should have told me you were coming. I would have prepared Emma's favorite dinner." Even in greeting her own sister, Linda managed to make it about Emma. Sarah, a tall woman with steel gray hair and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd spent 30 years as an emergency room doctor, looked around the living room with sharp eyes. She took in the framed photos of Emma covering every surface, the memorial candles burning on the mantel, and the donation box prominently displayed by the front door. "Hello, Linda. Robert." She turned to me and pulled me into a fierce hug. "Hayley, I'm so glad you called." That evening, the four of us sat around the dining room table, the same table where Emma and I had done homework together, where we'd eaten Sunday dinners as a family before everything changed. The tension was thick enough to cut. "Sarah," Linda began, "it's been so hard since Emma passed, but we've found purpose in keeping her memory alive, helping other families who are struggling the way we have." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Tell me about this Emma Foundation, Linda. How exactly does it help other families?" Linda launched into her practice speech about grief counseling and scholarship funds, about the community coming together to support families in need. She painted herself as a selfless mother channeling her pain into helping others. "And Hayley," Linda said, reaching over to pat my hand, "has been such a blessing during our difficult times. Even though she's struggling herself, she tries to help when she can." I felt Jasmine stiffen beside me. This was it. The moment Linda would perform her victim narrative for Sarah, expecting sympathy and validation. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "I think Aunt Sarah should know the truth." Linda's smile faltered. "What do you mean, honey?" "I mean the truth about my employment status, the truth about the money I've been sending you every month, the truth about what the Emma Foundation actually does with the donations it receives." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Linda's face went pale. "Hayley, you're upset about the bedroom. I understand that, but there's no need to bring Sarah into our private family matters." "Linda," Sarah said sharply, "let her talk." I pulled out my phone and showed Sarah my bank statements. I've been sending my parents $500 every month for 5 years, $30,000 total. They told me it was for grief counseling and medical bills. Sarah studied the records, then looked at Linda. $30,000? You told me Hayley was unemployed and struggling. "She was," Linda protested. "She lost her job and has been having such a hard time since Emma died. We've been supporting her emotionally and financially." "Mom," I said, "I've never been unemployed. I just got promoted to senior creative director.
I make $75,000 a year." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's voice was deadly calm. "Linda, you told me that Hayley was living in a studio apartment, could barely afford food, and that you were worried about her mental health?" We were worried about her. She seemed so distant after Emma died. She seemed distant because she was sending you $500 a month while you were telling everyone she was unemployed. Sarah's professional composure cracked. "Do you have any idea how worried I've been about this girl?" I felt something break open inside me. My aunt had been worried about me. Someone in my family had actually cared about my well-being. "There's more," Jasmine said quietly. She pulled out the folder we'd compiled over the past week. Bank records, church donation ledgers, newspaper articles, public record searches. Sarah spread the documents across the table. As she read, her expression grew increasingly angry. "Linda, you've been collecting donations from the community under false pretenses. Where are the scholarships? Where are the grief counseling programs?" "We're still building the fund," Linda said weakly. "For 5 years, you've been building the fund while spending the money on personal expenses?" Robert finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, we never meant it to go this far." "Go this far?" Sarah stood up, her voice rising. "You've been defrauding your neighbors, lying about your daughter's employment status, and collecting money from a grieving community while your other daughter has been supporting you financially. How far did you think it was going to go?" Linda burst into tears. "You don't understand what it's been like, losing Emma, trying to keep her memory alive, feeling like everyone's forgotten her already. The foundation gives people a way to honor her, to feel like they're part of something meaningful. By lying to them? By stealing from them? We're not stealing, we're grieving parents trying to honor our daughter's memory." I watched my mother's performance, the dramatic tears, the wounded victim act she'd perfected for 5 years. But for the first time, I wasn't buying it. "Mom," I said, standing up, "Emma's been dead for 5 years. I've been alive for 28. When do I get to exist in this family?" Linda looked at me like I'd slapped her. "What are you talking about? You're my daughter. Of course you exist."
Hayley finally confronted her parents about being erased from the family story. She demanded to know why her photos and achievements were hidden, while her mother, Linda, turned Emma's memory into a shrine and a fundraising scheme. Years of anger spilled out. Hayley was alive, grieving too, yet treated as invisible while sending money to parents who lied about her life. Sarah backed her, insisting Linda return the donations and seek help. Robert admitted the truth. They had taken tens of thousands from Hayley and neighbors under false pretenses. Hayley drew the line. She would no longer be their secret ATM. When Linda threatened to bar her from Emma's memorial, Hayley declared she would attend and reveal the truth. The next morning, Hayley met with Sarah, Jasmine, and Danny to prepare. Danny had compiled a full record of the fraud, and the group agreed on a strategy. Instead of disrupting the memorial, Hayley would speak privately with attendees beforehand, giving them the facts and reclaiming Emma's memory with honesty. For the first time since Emma's death, Hayley felt seen, not just as Emma's sister or her parents' financial resource, but as herself. That night's service would be her chance to honor Emma and reclaim her own identity.
"What about your parents?" Jasmine asked. "They're going to realize what you're doing." Sarah's expression hardened. "Let them. They've had 5 years to come clean about this fraud. If they choose to make a scene tonight, that's on them." We spent the morning preparing. Danny had printed out copies of key documents, the bank records showing my monthly payments, the church donation ledgers, the public record search showing no registered Emma Foundation. Sarah used her medical contacts to verify that no grief counseling programs existed under Emma's name.
Jasmine prepared a simple explanation of how the fraud had worked, language that would help people understand without overwhelming them. I worked on something else, a speech about Emma that wasn't my mother's sanitized version of perfection, but the real sister I'd lost. The girl who'd encouraged my art, who'd called me crying after bad dates, who dreamed of being a doctor so she could help people. Emma deserved to be remembered as a real person, not as a fundraising tool. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah asked as we prepared to leave for the high school. "Once you take this step, there's no going back with Linda and Robert." I thought about that for a moment. The parents I'd been trying to win over for 5 years, the family I'd been pouring money into hoping to earn my place back, the people who'd erased me from their lives while using my financial support to fund their deception. Aunt Sarah, I've been gone from their lives for 5 years already. I just didn't realize it until this week. The high school gymnasium was decorated with photos of Emma, but these weren't the museum-quality displays from my former bedroom. These were candid shots. Emma laughing with friends. Emma in her lab coat during a chemistry class. Emma at last year's homecoming game. Seeing these normal, happy pictures of my sister reminded me why tonight mattered. People began arriving at 6:30 for the 7 o'clock service. I recognized most of them, Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store, the Kowalski family from down the street, several teachers from the elementary school Emma and I had attended. These were good people who genuinely wanted to honor Emma's memory and help what they believed was a grieving family. Sarah approached Mrs. Patterson while I talked to Mr. Kowalski. The conversations were difficult but necessary. "Hayley, honey, it's so good to see you. Your mother mentioned you've been having such a hard time since Emma passed." "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I need to show you something." I pulled out the folder of documents. "I think there's been some confusion about my situation." As she read through the bank statements and employment records, her expression shifted from confusion to concern to anger. "You mean Linda has been taking money from all of us while you were sending her $500 every month?" "Yes, ma'am. And there are no scholarship programs, no grief counseling services. The Emma Foundation isn't even registered as a charity." Mrs. Patterson sat down heavily in one of the folding chairs. "Honey, I've been giving $50 every month for 3 years. I work 2 jobs, but I thought I was helping your family and supporting scholarships for local kids." "I know. I'm so sorry this happened to you." Around the gymnasium, similar conversations were happening. Sarah's medical authority gave weight to the evidence, while Danny's journalism background helped people understand the legal implications. Jasmine's psychological training helped them process the emotional betrayal. By the time my parents arrived at 6:45, word had spread through most of the crowd. I watched my mother's face change as she realized something was wrong. People weren't greeting her with their usual warm sympathy. Instead, they were gathering in small groups, talking in low, urgent voices. Linda scanned the room and her eyes found mine. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the gymnasium where Emma had been homecoming queen 5 years ago. Then her expression hardened into something I'd never seen before, pure rage. She walked straight toward me, Robert trailing behind, looking mortified. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "I told them the truth," I said simply. "You've ruined everything. This was for Emma. This was her night." Sarah stepped beside me. "No, Linda, this was your fundraising night. Emma's been dead for 5 years. Tonight should have been about celebrating her life, not profiting from her death." Father Miguel approached our group, his face grave. "Linda, Robert, I think we need to talk privately before this goes any further." But Linda was beyond reasoning. She looked around the gymnasium at the community she'd been deceiving, at the documentation being passed from hand to hand, and her carefully constructed narrative crumbling in real time.
You want to destroy your own family for what? Money? Attention? She said to me, her voice rising. Emma was the daughter that mattered, and you've always been jealous of that. The words hit like a physical blow, but they also clarified everything. After 5 years of wondering if I was being unfair, if I was misunderstanding my parents' grief, if I was somehow wrong to feel erased and exploited, Linda had just confirmed it all. Emma was the daughter that mattered. I had always been jealous. In my mother's mind, I was the lesser daughter whose only value was providing financial support while staying invisible. You're right, I said, my voice carrying across the quiet gymnasium. Emma was an amazing daughter. She was brilliant and kind and full of life, and her death was a tragedy that shouldn't have happened to anyone. The room had gone completely silent. Everyone listening.
But I'm amazing too. I'm a successful graphic designer who's built a career and a life. I'm an artist like Emma always encouraged me to be. I'm a sister who loved Emma deeply and has been grieving her for 5 years while sending money to support the family she left behind. I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd known me since childhood. I'm not Emma's replacement. I'm not a consolation prize. I'm not a bank account. I'm Hayley Thompson, and I deserve to exist in my own family without having to pay for the privilege. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then Mrs. Patterson started clapping. Slowly, others joined her until the gymnasium echoed with applause. Not for Emma's memory, though that was important too. For me. For Hayley Thompson, finally standing up and claiming her place in the world. Linda looked around the room in shock, realizing that her victim narrative had lost its power. The community wasn't rallying to support her anymore. They were supporting me. "This memorial service is canceled," she announced desperately. "No," I said firmly, "it's not. Emma deserves to be remembered properly, but by people who loved her for who she really was, not as a fundraising tool." As Linda and Robert left the gymnasium in defeat, Father Miguel stepped forward to address the crowd. "Friends, I think we should take some time to remember Emma Thompson, the girl who tutored struggling students, who volunteered at the animal shelter, who dreamed of being a doctor so she could help people. And we should also celebrate her sister Hayley, who has shown tremendous courage tonight in making sure Emma's memory is honored with truth and dignity." As the crowd began sharing real memories of Emma, stories of her kindness, her humor, her dreams, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 5 years. I felt like part of my own family again. Not the family that had erased me, but the community that had always known I existed and was finally free to acknowledge it. The week following the memorial service felt like living in the aftermath of an earthquake. The community was reeling from the revelation that their beloved grieving mother had been systematically defrauding them, and I was dealing with the reality that my parents had disappeared completely from my life. Danny had been fielding calls all week for his investigation piece. The Millbrook Gazette had never seen anything like it, a trusted community figure exposed as a fraud with documentation that couldn't be disputed. But Danny was being careful, professional. He wanted to make sure every fact was verified before publication. "I've got confirmation from 3 banks now," he told me over coffee Wednesday morning. "Your parents' account received over $47,000 in donations over 5 years. That's on top of the $30,000 you sent them." $77,000. The number was staggering. Sarah had been working her own angles. As a doctor, she had connections with legal professionals, and she'd been researching what charges my parents might face. Charity fraud is a felony in Oregon. The fact that they've been collecting donations for a non-existent foundation while hiding your financial support makes this wire fraud as well. We're talking about potential prison time. The thought of my parents in prison made my stomach turn, despite everything they'd done. These were the people who'd taught me to ride a bike, who attended my school plays, who held me when Emma died. The fact that they'd spent 5 years manipulating and defrauding me didn't erase the complexity of loving people who'd hurt you. What if they just pay everyone back? What if we can resolve this without criminal charges? Jasmine leaned forward, her therapist training evident. "Hayley, that's a very generous impulse. But these people deserve justice. Mrs. Patterson working 2 jobs to donate $50 a month that she couldn't afford. The church collections from families struggling to make rent. Your parents didn't just steal money, they stole people's trust and goodness."
She was right, but it didn't make the decision easier. That Thursday, Father Miguel called me with disturbing news. He'd been going through old records and had discovered something that changed everything. "Hayley, I need you to come to the church. There's something you need to see." I met him in his office where he had boxes of financial records spread across his desk. He'd been reviewing our donation records going back to when Emma first died. The Emma Foundation collections didn't start right after her death. They started 6 months later, right after your parents received a life insurance payout for Emma. My blood went cold. Life insurance? He said $50,000. He said that your mother came to him asking for prayers about whether it was appropriate to accept the money given the circumstances of Emma's accident. I stared at him, processing this new information. My parents had received $50,000 in life insurance money 6 months after Emma died. Then they'd started collecting donations from the community while simultaneously requesting monthly payments from me. Father Miguel, they told me they needed help with medical bills and grief counseling. They never mentioned life insurance money. "There's more," he said quietly. "I found records of other insurance payouts. Emma had a small policy through her college and there was a settlement from the accident. Your parents received over $80,000 in the first year after Emma's death. $80,000. My parents had been millionaires by Millbrook standards when they started asking me for money and collecting donations from neighbors who could barely afford groceries."
"This changes everything," Sarah said when I called her. "They weren't struggling financially when they started the Emma Foundation. This was planned fraud from the beginning." That evening, Danny published his investigation in the Millbrook Gazette. The headline read, "Local family collected thousands in fraudulent charity while hiding insurance payouts." The article was thorough and devastating. Danny had interviewed dozens of community members, documented the fake charity status, revealed the insurance payouts, and included my bank records showing the monthly payments I'd been sending. The story painted a picture of systematic deception that had exploited an entire community's grief and generosity. By Friday morning, my parents were facing criminal charges. Detective Maria Santos called me that afternoon. "Miss Thompson, we'd like you to come in and give a formal statement about the financial fraud. You're considered a victim in this case, given the misrepresentation of your employment status and the fact that your monthly payments were obtained under false pretenses." Sitting in the police station, telling my story to Detective Santos made everything feel surreal. I was officially accusing my own parents of fraud. The little girl who'd wanted nothing more than their approval was now providing evidence that might send them to prison. The district attorney will likely offer them a plea deal, full restitution to all victims, community service, and probation. Given their ages and lack of prior criminal history, they probably won't serve jail time if they cooperate. What does full restitution mean? They'll have to pay back every penny they took from community donations and from you, plus interest and legal fees. We estimate around $90,000 total. I thought about my parents' house, their car, their lifestyle funded by fraud. They'd have to sell everything to pay restitution, and they'd still probably owe money they didn't have. Detective Santos, what happens if they can't pay it all back? Then they go to prison. Charity fraud carries a mandatory sentence if restitution isn't made in full. That weekend, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I called my parents. Linda answered, her voice small and defeated. "Hayley? Mom, I want to meet with you and Dad. Neutral location. Just to talk." There was a long pause. "The lawyer says we shouldn't talk to you without legal representation." "I'm not wearing a wire, Mom. I need to understand why." We met at Moofy's Diner Sunday morning. My parents looked like they'd aged 10 years in a week. Linda's dramatic flair was gone, replaced by exhausted defeat. Robert could barely make eye contact. "Why?" I asked simply. Linda started to speak, then stopped. She tried again. "After Emma died, people were so kind. They brought food, they sent cards, they donated money. For the first time since Emma died, I felt important. Like
Emma's death mattered to people. It did matter. People loved her. But then the sympathy started to fade. People moved on. And I couldn't bear the thought of Emma being forgotten. So you created the foundation. Robert finally spoke. It started small, just a donation box at the church. But people kept giving, and Linda realized she could use the money to keep Emma's memory alive. By lying about me? By telling everyone I was unemployed and struggling? Linda's eyes filled with tears, but they looked genuine for the first time in years. I was jealous of you, Hayley. You were alive. You were successful. You were moving on. Emma was dead, and you were everything she would never get to be. The honesty was brutal and necessary. So you decided to punish me for surviving. I decided to make Emma matter more than your success. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I made my proposal. I'll help you with the restitution. Not all of it, but enough to keep you out of prison. On 3 conditions. They both looked up, hope flickering in their eyes. First, you pay back every community member in full, no exceptions. Second, you both get real grief counseling, not the fake kind you claim to be funding, but actual therapy to deal with Emma's death and what you've done since. And third, you publicly apologize to everyone you defrauded. Hayley, Robert said, his voice breaking, we don't deserve your help. No, you don't. But Emma wouldn't want you in prison, and despite everything, I still love you, even though you've made it very hard to. Linda reached across the table tentatively, as if asking permission to touch my hand. I let her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. You deserved better parents. It wasn't absolution, but it was a start. As I drove home that afternoon, I realized that justice didn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looked like forcing people to face the truth about themselves and make different choices going forward. My parents would spend years making amends for their fraud. I would spend time learning to have a relationship with them that wasn't built on financial exploitation or emotional manipulation. And Emma could finally rest in peace, her memory no longer weaponized against the sister who'd loved her. 3 weeks later, I stood before a packed courtroom in the Millbrook County Courthouse, watching my parents face the consequences of 5 years of systematic fraud. The plea hearing was supposed to be routine. They'd agreed to plead guilty to charity fraud and wire fraud in exchange for probation and supervised restitution, but nothing about this situation felt routine.
Judge Catherine Wells, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the case file with obvious disapproval. In 30 years on the bench, I've rarely seen a case involving such deliberate exploitation of community trust, she said, looking directly at my parents. The victims in this case gave money they could barely afford because they believed they were helping a grieving family and supporting educational opportunities for local young people. Linda and Robert sat at the defendant's table with their court-appointed lawyer, both looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. Linda's usual dramatic flair was completely absent, replaced by genuine shame that seemed to diminish her physically. Your Honor, their lawyer said, my clients acknowledge the full extent of their wrongdoing and are prepared to make complete restitution to all victims. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Karen Mitchell, stood to address the court. Your Honor, while the defendants have agreed to restitution, the psychological and emotional damage they've caused extends far beyond the financial fraud. They've shattered a community's trust and exploited their own daughter's grief and generosity for years. Judge Wells turned to me. Ms. Thompson, I understand you're here to provide a victim impact statement? I'd been dreading and anticipating this moment for weeks. Sarah, Jasmine, and Danny sat in the gallery behind me, their presence giving me strength. Your Honor, I want to start by saying that my parents' actions were inexcusable.
They stole from neighbors who trusted them, they lied about charitable work that never existed, and they manipulated my grief over my sister's death to extort money from me for 5 years. Linda flinched at the word extort, but I continued. But I also want to say something about forgiveness and accountability. My parents turned my sister's death into a business opportunity while erasing my existence from our family. That caused me psychological harm that I'm still processing with professional help. I paused, looking at Linda and Robert. However, I believe people can change if they're forced to confront the full impact of their actions. I'm not asking for leniency. I'm asking for meaningful accountability that includes mandatory counseling, community service related to victims' rights, and ongoing supervision to ensure restitution is completed. Judge Wells nodded approvingly. Ms. Thompson, do you have specific recommendations for the court? Yes, Your Honor. I believe my parents should be required to attend weekly therapy sessions for 2 years, perform 500 hours of community service with organizations that help fraud victims, and make monthly payments to a victim restitution fund until every donor is repaid with interest. The prosecutor looked surprised by my detailed recommendations, but Judge Wells seemed impressed. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, the judge said, please stand. My parents rose unsteadily, holding hands for what looked like the first time in years. You've pleaded guilty to serious felony charges that normally carry significant prison time. The only reason you're not going to prison today is because of your daughter's extraordinary generosity in helping facilitate restitution and her thoughtful recommendations for accountability measures. Linda started crying quietly, the kind of tears that seemed to come from genuine remorse rather than self-pity. I'm sentencing you to 5 years of probation with the following conditions. You will pay full restitution of $87,000 to all victims within 18 months. You will attend weekly individual and couples counseling. You will perform 500 hours of community service with victim advocacy organizations, and you will have no contact with any former donors without court approval. Judge Wells paused, her expression stern. If you violate any condition of your probation, you'll serve the maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. After the hearing, my parents approached me in the courthouse hallway. The media attention had been intense. Local news stations had covered the story extensively, and several national outlets had picked up Danny's investigation. Hayley, Robert said quietly, thank you for what you said in there. We know we don't deserve your help. You right, you don't. But Emma would want me to help you become better people, not just punish you for being terrible ones. Linda looked at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes since before Emma died. Actual recognition of me as a separate person. I want you to know, she said, I've started seeing a therapist. Dr. Martinez has been helping me understand how losing Emma made me disappear you. That wasn't grief, it was selfishness. It was the first time my mother had ever acknowledged that her actions were about her choices, not just her circumstances. I'm glad you're getting help, Mom, but this is going to take time. Years, probably. I know, she said. I just hope you'll give us the chance to prove we can do better. Over the following weeks, I watched my parents begin the difficult process of making amends. They met individually with every person they'd defrauded, apologizing and explaining how restitution would work. Linda took a job at the grocery store for the first time since Emma died. Robert picked up extra construction work. They sold their house and moved into a small apartment. Mrs. Patterson told me later that Linda's apology had been genuine and detailed. She didn't make excuses or try to minimize what she'd done. She just said she was sorry and asked what she could do to make it right. The community response was mixed. Some people, like Father Miguel and Mrs. Kim, were willing to forgive and move forward. Others felt too betrayed to maintain relationships with my parents. Both reactions were understandable.
Danny's investigation won a state journalism award, which he dedicated to the victims of charity fraud who deserved better from people they trusted. The story had sparked statewide legislation requiring better oversight of small charitable fundraising efforts. Sarah returned to Seattle but stayed in regular contact. I should have intervened years ago, she told me.
I saw the signs of Linda's unhealthy grief, but I didn't want to interfere. "You're interfering now," I said. "That's what matters." Jasmine helped me process the complex emotions of holding my parents accountable while still maintaining a relationship with them. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing," she explained. "It means choosing not to let their actions define your future." As winter settled over Millbrook, I realized that justice had taken a form I'd never expected. My parents were facing real consequences. The community was being made whole financially, and I was finally free to have a relationship with my family that wasn't based on manipulation or financial exploitation. Emma's shrine had been dismantled, her belongings stored respectfully, but no longer displayed like museum pieces. My childhood bedroom was now just an empty room, waiting for me to decide what I wanted it to become. For the first time since Emma died, it felt like our family had a chance to heal properly, to grieve our loss without exploiting it, to remember Emma without erasing me, to move forward with honesty instead of performance. It wasn't the dramatic revenge I might have fantasized about, but it was something better. Real accountability that created space for real relationships. 6 months after the court hearing, I found myself back in Millbrook for an unexpected reason. My parents had asked me to help them plan a genuine memorial for Emma. Not a fundraising event, not a performance of grief, but a simple gathering to remember my sister on what would have been her 25th birthday. The request had come through Dr. Martinez, their therapist, who'd been working with them on what she called healthy grieving practices. According to her, my parents had made significant progress in understanding how their previous memorials had been about their own needs rather than honoring Emma's memory. "They want to do something that includes you," Dr. Martinez explained during a phone call. "They recognize that Emma was your sister too, and that your grief has been invalidated for 5 years." I was skeptical. 6 months of therapy seemed like a short time to undo 5 years of toxic behavior, but Jasmine encouraged me to consider it. She said, people can change, especially when they're facing real consequences and getting professional help. The question is whether you want to be part of their healing process. So I drove to Millbrook on a Saturday morning in March, bringing with me a box of things I'd saved from Emma's life. Real mementos, not the sanitized perfection my mother had displayed in the shrine. Emma's sketchbook from high school art class, filled with doodles and half-finished drawings. A journal where she'd written about her fears of not being smart enough for medical school. Photos of us together, sister moments that hadn't made it into Linda's museum displays. My parents were waiting at the small community center they'd rented for the afternoon. The difference in them was immediately apparent. Linda had lost weight and seemed more grounded, less performative in her movements. Robert looked me in the eye when he spoke, something he hadn't done consistently in years. "Hayley, thank you for coming. I know this is complicated." The memorial they'd planned was simple. 20 folding chairs arranged in a circle, a table with a single photo of Emma, one I'd taken during her sophomore year of college where she was laughing at something off camera, completely natural and unposed. "We invited about 15 people," Robert explained. "Emma's close friends, a few teachers who really knew her, Mrs. Kim, Father Miguel, people who loved her for who she actually was, not for what they thought she represented." As people arrived, I was struck by how different the atmosphere felt from the elaborate fundraising events of previous years. These were intimate conversations about real memories. Emma's college roommate shared stories about late-night study sessions and Emma's terrible cooking attempts. Mr. Peterson, her high school chemistry teacher, talked about how Emma would stay after class to help struggling classmates understand difficult concepts. Emma wasn't perfect. She was anxious about grades, she cried over boys who didn't deserve her tears, and she once got so stressed about the MCAT that she ate nothing but cereal for a week. But she was real, and she was kind, and she made everyone around her feel important. When it was my turn to speak, I pulled out Emma's journal and read an entry she'd written during her freshman year of college. I called Hayley today because I was feeling overwhelmed about choosing classes. She didn't give me advice about what I should major in. She just listened to me talk through all my fears and then reminded me that I don't have to have everything figured out right now. I'm so lucky to have a sister who sees me as a person instead of just the smart one or the responsible one or whatever label everyone else wants to put on me. Hayley knows the real me, and she loves me anyway. The room was quiet for a long moment. Linda was crying, but it was different from her previous theatrical displays. These tears seemed private, internal. "I never knew she wrote that," Linda said softly. "There's a lot you never knew about Emma, because you turned her into a symbol instead of remembering her as a person."
After the formal memorial ended, Linda, Robert, and I stayed to clean up. The work gave us something to do with our hands while we navigated the awkward territory of trying to rebuild a relationship. "The therapist says we need to make direct amends to you," Linda said as she folded chairs. "Not just apologize, but acknowledge specifically what we did and how it affected you." I looked at my mother, this woman who'd raised me and then spent 5 years systematically erasing me from our family narrative. "I'm listening." Linda set down the chair she was holding and faced me directly. "I turned Emma's death into a performance that made me the center of attention. I erased your grief, your achievements, and your identity because I was jealous that you were alive and successful while Emma was dead. I manipulated you into giving us money while lying to the community about your situation. I treated you like a bank account instead of like my daughter." The words hung in the air between us. Robert stepped forward. "I enabled all of it," he said quietly. "I knew what Linda was doing was wrong, but I was too weak and too afraid of conflict to stop her. I let her erase you because it was easier than dealing with my own grief honestly." "And how did that affect me?" I asked, needing to hear them say it. "It made you feel invisible in your own family," Linda said, her voice breaking. "It stole 5 years of your life when you should have been building your career and relationships instead of supporting parents who were lying to you. It forced you to grieve Emma alone while we performed our grief for public sympathy. It taught you that your value in this family was financial, not personal. We made you pay for the privilege of being the surviving daughter." I felt something release in my chest. They understood. They actually understood what they had done to me. "What now?" I asked. "Now we try to rebuild," Linda said. "If you're willing. We know it might take years. We know you might decide we're not worth the effort. But we want to try to be actual parents to you, not people who exploit you." Over the following months, we established new patterns. My parents continued their restitution payments, completed their community service, and maintained regular therapy sessions. They kept me updated on their progress without asking for emotional support or validation. I visited Millbrook once a month, but stayed in a hotel rather than their apartment. We had dinner together, went for walks, talked about my work and their recovery process. Slowly, carefully, we began building a relationship based on honesty instead of manipulation. Linda got a promotion at the grocery store and seemed to find genuine satisfaction in regular work. Robert joined a group support group for parents and began processing Emma's death in healthier ways. They were becoming real people again, instead of performers in their own tragedy. The most significant change came 8 months after the memorial, when Linda called me with an unusual request. "Hayley, I have something I want to give you, something I should have given you years ago." When I arrived in Millbrook the following weekend, Linda handed me a small wooden box. "These are Emma's letters to you. She wrote them during college but never sent them. I found them in her dorm room after the accident, and I kept them because I wanted to preserve everything of hers. But they belong to you."
Inside the box were 12 letters written in Emma's familiar handwriting. Letters about her struggles with pre-med courses, her excitement about potential research opportunities, her worries about boys and friendships, and whether she was smart enough to become the doctor she dreamed of being. But more than that, they were letters that consistently referenced me. I wish Hayley were here to help me figure this out. I can't wait to show Hayley the art museum here. I hope when Hayley visits, we can drive to the coast together. Emma had been thinking about me, missing me, planning future memories with me. My sister had loved me and valued our relationship even when she was busy building her own life. "Why didn't you give these to me before?" I asked. Linda's answer was honest and painful. "Because they prove that Emma loved you specifically, not just as part of the family. And I couldn't bear to share her love with anyone, even you." As I read through Emma's letters that evening in my hotel room, I realized that my sister's death had stolen two things from me: her presence in my life and the knowledge that I had meant so much to her. The first loss was permanent, but the second had finally been restored. For the first time since Emma died, I felt like I was grieving with my family instead of despite them.
The transformation felt symbolic of everything that had changed. The candles and museum-like displays were gone, replaced by family photos that showed our real history. Emma and me at various ages, sometimes together, sometimes separate, both of us looking genuinely happy instead of performatively perfect. My high school art awards hung beside Emma's academic certificates. My college graduation photo sat next to hers. Both daughters celebrated equally. "It feels more honest," Linda said, hanging curtains while I arranged books on the shelf, like a room where both our daughters lived and mattered. The past 2 years had been a journey none of us could have predicted. My parents had completed their court-ordered restitution, paying back every penny they'd taken from community donations, plus interest. Linda had been promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store and seemed to genuinely enjoy the work and routine. Robert had joined a men's grief support group and was learning to express emotions he'd suppressed for decades. More importantly, they'd both stuck with therapy. Dr. Martinez had helped them understand that their exploitation of Emma's memory hadn't been about loving her more, but about avoiding the hard work of processing grief honestly. They'd learned to grieve Emma without weaponizing her death against me. The hardest part, Robert had told me during one of our monthly dinners, was accepting that we'd been terrible parents to you while convincing ourselves we were honoring Emma. We thought making her memory bigger would somehow make losing her hurt less. But it just made the hurt spread to everyone around you. I'd replied, and he'd nodded, understanding. My own healing had been equally complex. Jasmine had helped me work through years of suppressed anger, grief, and self-doubt. I'd learned to separate my love for Emma from my resentment about how her death was used against me. I'd also learned to set boundaries with my parents that protected my emotional well-being while still allowing for relationship rebuilding. The most significant change had been professional. 6 months earlier, I'd launched my own graphic design consultancy, specializing in nonprofit branding and marketing for legitimate charitable organizations. Danny had written about my business launch, noting the irony that someone who'd been victimized by charity fraud was now helping real charities communicate more effectively with their donors. "I feel like turning my experience into something useful," I'd explained to him. "Instead of just being angry about what happened, I can help organizations that actually do the work they claim to do." The business was thriving. My experience had given me unique insight into what donors wanted to see from charities: transparency, accountability, and evidence of real impact. I'd worked with food banks, domestic violence shelters, and educational foundations, helping them build trust with their communities through honest, compelling storytelling. Danny had moved to Portland 6 months ago to take a job with the Oregonian, and we'd been cautiously exploring a romantic relationship. Having someone who understood my family history without needing extensive explanation felt healing.
He'd witnessed my parents' fraud firsthand and supported my decision to pursue both justice and reconciliation. "You taught me something important," he'd said recently, "that you can hold people accountable and still choose love. That's not easy, but it's powerful." Jasmine had become a consistent presence in my life, the aunt I had always needed. She visited Portland regularly and had helped me understand that Linda's behavior toward me hadn't been typical grief. It had been a form of psychological abuse enabled by genuine loss. Understanding the distinction had helped me separate my sympathy for my parents' grief from my anger about their treatment of me. The real test of our family's healing came that spring when we established the legitimate Emma Thompson Memorial Scholarship for art students. Using money I'd saved over the past 2 years, along with contributions from community members who wanted to honor Emma's memory properly, we created a real charitable fund with actual oversight and transparent selection processes. The first recipient was Maria Santos, Father Miguel's niece, a talented young artist whose family couldn't afford college. At the award ceremony, I spoke about Emma's genuine support for my art and her belief that creative people deserved opportunities to develop their talents. Emma always said that art matters because it helps people see the world differently, I told the small gathering. She would be thrilled to know her memory is helping another young artist pursue her dreams honestly. Linda and Robert sat in the audience listening to me speak about Emma without trying to control the narrative or make themselves the center of attention. It was the first time in 7 years that Emma's memory was being honored without exploitation. After the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson approached me. She'd been one of the community members most hurt by my parents' fraud, having given money she could barely afford. "Hayley, I want you to know how proud I am of who you've become. Your parents made mistakes, but they raised a daughter with real integrity. Emma would be proud of you too." The comment hit me unexpectedly hard. For 7 years, I'd wondered what Emma would think about our family's dysfunction, whether she'd blame me for not preventing it or for eventually exposing it.
3 years after Emma's death, I visited her grave and finally felt peace, not because our family was fixed, but because it was honest. I told her about the fraud, the court case, my business, and Danny, and realized she'd have wanted healing, not just punishment. Back in Portland, Linda surprised me with something new, a call just to check in, to offer support instead of asking for it. That shift inspired me to start a blog about family healing after fraud and emotional abuse. Within a week, hundreds of people shared their own stories, and I knew I'd found my calling. 6 months later, I spoke at a victims conference about forgiveness and accountability. I reminded the audience that not all relationships can or should be saved, but real change makes rebuilding possible. A woman told me my story gave her hope to reconnect with her brother after betrayal. Driving home, I understood that Emma's memory now lived in the work I did for others. I was no longer the invisible daughter or the forgotten sister. I was Hayley Thompson, business owner, daughter, sister, and someone who had learned that love sometimes means demanding accountability. Emma would have been proud. And finally, so was I. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.